everything.
Golly.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
They got some kind of stuff
All right.
going on right now. Everybody, they dropping like flies at work. We had 2 leave today.
Really?
I'm not used to it. I don't want it.
No, I cover myself.
People are not well
Not that.
because it's all we've thought about for the last 2 years is not being well.
No cooked up.
Guess what happens when you think about being sick all the time? You get sick. You tell a kid they're going to be bad, you tell them long enough, guess what?
They're going to be back.
That's right.
Exactly.
You tell somebody they're fat and they'll always be fat, guess what they're going to be? Always fat.
My son told
It's just the way it is.
my grandkids, my granddaughters, Misty and Allie, you know, you're bad. You just like your mom. They got a divorce. You know, you just like your mom. You just like. I told Corey, don't do that. You're bad. You're not worth. You know, and they grew up to be bad. But praise the Lord, they turned the corner just last couple of years. Allie's in church. Misty's got a good man that takes her to church, and so. But
There you
that's
go.
right. That's right.
That's the only way you can change.
That's the only way it overcomes. That's right.
Amen.
And God's patiently waiting for us to remember that again. All right, we're in chapter 6 of 2 Kings, and it is, so everybody knows that tonight's your last night, huh? Well, Brittany's leaving. They're moving.
Where are you moving?
Already moved.
No, not fully.
Well,
You're moving like out of town kind of thing?
like out of state kind of thing. Like out of the region kind of thing. Like all the way back to Pennsylvania kind of thing.
Pennsylvania. Just as winter's setting in.
Your mom going
What's the
to?
matter with you people, man?
Your mom going to?
Shoot, she's already up there.
Yeah, my mom lives there.
They've been up there for 3
Where'd
years.
you live?
Oh, okay. I thought she'd come back.
Montana?
Oh yeah, we love this.
She's back and forth.
You love the
Yeah.
winter?
Shoot.
Well,
Both my parents are on the
Yeah.
You're gonna get really cold
You know, I
up
always figured I could
You
move
gonna get
back
really
to
cold up
upstate
there.
New
I
York
know,
if
I'm
I
from
had a
there.
lot of money.
I don't like the cold.
Now I
but-
got just another reason to go to Pennsylvania.
That's right. Everybody's welcome to come visit.
Your husband ever been in the cold like that?
Yeah.
He has not.
I wanna go to
But
Hershey,
we were there
Pennsylvania.
last
That's
year
my
for
other
Christmas,
reason.
but he's been working there.
To go to
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
Oh, he has
Yeah.
been working
there.
there?
I won't talk.
Yeah, which is one of the big reasons why I moved.
All right, we're going to start.
Okay.
So this particular section we're going to look at, this is kind of the end of the Elisha thing, almost the end. We've got, we'll touch a little bit in chapter 8. But then it's just almost like the way Elijah appeared on the scene. Elisha just kind of leaves the same way. So we're not going to get to the whole end of it. That happens in chapter 9. But we're going to look at a section tonight that really left me perplexed for a good while.
Really?
I really had to work hard on this passage because I really couldn't figure out what in the world, why this was placed where it is, how they connect, what's the message. It really was a challenge, but I think I may have come on something that we can talk about tonight. I looked in several commentaries, and nobody was thinking about it the way I'm thinking about it, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that the way that they were approaching it was strictly studying structure and words and that kind of thing. But there's more here, so I'm hoping we can dig through it. So begin with verse 1 of chapter 6. It says, the son of the prophet said to Elisha,
Kings?
2 Kings chapter 6. So we're back in Gilgal, or we're in Jericho, but we're in a place that's close enough to the Jordan River to where it's not a difficulty. Let me turn this off so it'll stop doing all that. So one of those places, both of these cities had a group of prophets that lived there, and that is to let us know, as we already knew from Elijah, that there's more of God's people at work and around than what we're led to believe. But still, the nation itself, the northern kingdom, is in a mess. and we'll find out that the southern kingdom's not much better. So anyway, these prophets are there, and it says, please notice the place where we live under your supervision is too small for us. So this group of prophets is growing under Elisha. So he says, please let us go to the Jordan where we can get a log and can build ourselves a place to live there. So they're going to move the headquarters of their prophetic guild from either Gilgal or Jericho down to the Jordan River. And they're going to cut some trees down and build them a hut or a house or whatever they're going to do here. So he said, go. Then one said, please come with your servants. So he says, I'll come. So they went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water, and he cried out, "Oh, my master, it was borrowed." So what's the situation here? Here's this prophet, and he's doing this thing with the other prophets to kind of improve their life and their situation. And he's borrowed this axe head, or this axe, and he's lost the head of the axe. Now, it hasn't been too terribly long, probably 200 years, that the Israelites have been making things out of iron anyway. Before that time, if you remember at the beginning of 1 Samuel, they had to get everything that was made of iron from the Philistines. So they were having to bargain with their enemies in order to get a plow or anything that they wanted made out of iron. Of course, they couldn't get a sword. But of course, all of that changed. But still in all, this was a valuable piece of equipment. And worse than that, it had been borrowed. And worse than that, this poor fellow felt like he was not going to be able to pay the guy back for the axe head. And so he screams out, "Oh, my master, it was borrowed." Then the man of God asked, "Where did it fall?" So he showed him the place where the man of God, The man of God cut a piece of wood, threw it there, and it made the iron float. Then he said, "Pick it up." So he reached out and he took it. So here we have the same kind of pattern. There's a miracle performed here, but there's participation that goes along with the miracle. Both the man that lost the axe head had to tell him where the axe head was, and he had to reach down and pick it up. Elisha participates in performing this miracle. In what way? He throws a stick down in the water, and the iron floats. Okay? So, akin to what? Who else had a rod that he used to perform miracles? Moses. And when Moses cast his staff down upon the water, the water parted, right? Okay. So here we have a hint. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but where are we?
2 Kings chapter 6.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have
That's fine. That's
told you again.
No, sir. I just walked in.
So the writer is reminding us that Elisha, when he asked for this double blessing, remember when Elijah was going up, he said, "Master, all I want from you is a double blessing of your spirit, of the spirit that is in you." And so since that day, Elisha has been living through and living by that spirit. And now, as we reach the end of this, he's tied it full circle back to Moses and Moses' ability to care for God's people in a way that saves them. Now that miracle was huge, right? Parting of the Red Sea is a big deal. We make movies about it. All right? But nobody's ever made a movie about Elisha throwing a stick in the water. But the other thing that it illustrates here is that God is just as interested in the small things for his people as he is the big things.
Amen.
And that he accommodates those needs in ways that are just as miraculous as it may be the bigger things. And so that's part of the lesson here. The other part is that as this guild was growing, as these prophets began to grow in number, there was not going to let something as simple as an axe head slow down the progress. They needed the axe head back. He got the axe head back, or God gave him the axe head back. So just two little lessons from that. As we look through these series of miracles, when we started back at the beginning of the Elisha era here, we see several of these, what seem to be small, personal, and private miracles that matter a lot. In fact, we're going to see here in a minute how the small thing that was done, well, considered a small thing because it was done privately, but the raising of the Shunammite woman's son, comes to mean much more later. So the writer often starts with a little bit of the story, and then when we finally get to the end of it, it's grown into something quite magnanimous.
The story about Elisha and the lady and the son that we did a couple weeks ago, that was just, I had never read that in the Bible.
Yeah.
I'd read a lot of stories about him and things that he had done, but the son, that was just touchy right here. That was awesome.
All right, so now we got the Aramean War. King of Aram. Aram, same thing as Syria. They're the forerunners of Syria. So we have the Arameans that become the Syrians, that become the oppressors of the northern kingdom. Okay, so just kind of put all that together. Ben-Hadad, there's two Ben-Hadads. This is the second one that we've dealt with in Scripture. Okay, he's the king of Aram. So just to kind of set the stage there. So
Who is, say that again, Brother Mark?
Ben-Hadad,
Ben-Hadad,
Ben-Hadad.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So when the king of Aram was waging war against Israel, he conferred with his servants. My camp will be at such and such place. So he's telling his underlings, his captains and his lieutenants, this is where we're going to camp. But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel. The man of God is who? That's Elisha. He says, be careful passing by this place, for the Arameans are going down there. Consequently, the king of Israel sent word to the place the man of God had told him about. The man of God repeatedly warned the king, so the king would be on his guard. All right? So here is, Elisha is continually helping Joram, the king of Israel. So the king of Aram was enraged because of this matter, and he called his servants, demanding of them, tell me which one of us is for the king of Israel. So this is the story. The king of Israel knows everything that the king of Aram is doing. All right? So every time he makes a move, the king's already made a move. And he's very frustrated, so he thinks, there's a spy in my camp. Somebody here is helping out the Israelites. One of his servants said, no one, my lord, the king. Elisha, the prophet of Israel, tells the king of Israel even the words you speak in your bedroom. All right, so now we know that the king of Aram has no secrets from God, and God's just spilling the beans to Elisha, and Elisha's spilling the beans to the king of Israel. All right, so here in the midst of this is God at work. This is God using his man who has dedicated his whole existence to God. Here's God using his man to thwart the enemies of Israel. And what we have to remember about this is that Israel's quickly becoming a nation that does not fear God. They're becoming more and more pagan all the time. But they're still God's people. That they are God's people matters because God made a promise. And he made that promise as far back as Abraham. Okay? So although his people were changing and they would have to be redirected at some point in time in history back toward him, at this point in time, God is revealing more of himself in a way that they may come to understand more deeply who he is before it's too late. And the before it's too late is coming rather quickly. After Elisha leaves the scene, we see a degradation of structure in Israel and Judah very quickly. So this is kind of the last chance to see. So the king said, "Go and see where he is, so I can send men to capture him." So now he's hunting. Hey!
Carol introduced herself like I never had, like I don't even know her.
How are y'all?
You guys?
Yeah.
I hadn't seen you in so long.
We're in 2 Kings chapter 8.
I know your work schedule's been kind of messed up.
I was just telling her I have not even been, I haven't ran in months. Like tonight is the first time I actually.
That's
ran.
serious.
I'm serious. We went to a game in North Carolina, and I was supposed to have a 10K race. I ran that thing and haven't even ran or trained or anything for it. It's
Oh my
been that
goodness.
bad.
Oh
It really-
man.
But
Well,
it's gonna get better now. We got it covered.
well, I'm glad y'all are here. I look through the door every week thinking maybe it'll be this week because you told me you were having to work, and so I'm so glad. All right, so we're just talking about Elisha here. So the king of Aram is out to capture Elisha because he's really the spy. God's the spy, and Elisha's the mouthpiece. They can't stop God, but maybe we can stop the mouthpiece. Okay. When he was told Elijah is in Dothan, Dothan is a little bit south. Yeah. Well, Dothan, Israel. I'm trying to think where it is. It's south and east of Samaria. So he sent horses, chariots, and a massive army there. They went by night and surrounded the city. So he finds out where Elisha is. He sends this huge army after him, and he surrounds the whole city. All right, when the servant of the man of God got up early and went out, he discovered an army with horses and chariots surrounding the city. So he asked Elijah, "Oh, my master, what will we do?" So Elisha said, "Don't be afraid, for those who are with us outnumber those who are with them." Okay. Then Elijah prayed, "Lord, please open his eyes and let him see." So the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw that the mountains were covered with horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So if you've ever wondered what the term the Lord of hosts means, it means what? It means the Lord of armies. So the host word is an old King James interpretation of that word, but it actually means the Lord of the armies. And here we have this beautiful picture of what that means. So, first of all, this pagan army is coming after God's man. So God's response is to send a heavenly army to take care of his man. Okay? So there's a big, huge lesson that we can just run right by and miss in there. But if we are obedient to God and doing his will and showing the world who he is, at whatever cost may seem to rise up, whatever oppression may seem to come, we can trust that God's already got it figured out and covered if we're just trusting. So last week I preached about this in Psalm 57. If we have confidence in him, we can sing from the mountaintops about it and not worry about what that's going to mean because he's got us. And this is the same thing. So the servant of Elisha, he opens, his eyes are open to the reality of God around him. And there's this army that is there. There's no way that this earthly army is going to be able to conquer this heavenly army that has appeared. When the Arameans came against him, Elijah prayed to the Lord, "Please strike this nation with blindness." Okay? Why didn't he just say strike them dead? He's already struck two groups of soldiers dead once upon a time. Remember? Two of them came and they didn't pay him any respect, so he struck them dead. And finally the third one said, "Wait a minute. We're just here to deliver a message. Please don't strike us dead." Okay, but here Elijah, he doesn't strike them dead. He just says he asked God to strike them blind. Okay? So he struck them with blindness. according to Elisha's word. That's an important. This is an important sentence here. Okay, God's not telling Elijah what to do. Elijah's telling God what to do.
Asking.
He says, please strike this nation with blindness. So he struck them with blindness. It's like when the writer's writing this, there's no hesitation about what's going on here. Okay, so the connection that Elisha and God have is seamless. Elijah knows he's not asking for anything that God wouldn't already approve of. So there's a seamless relationship that exists that does this wonderful thing that we totally are caught off guard by. Because up until this time, anytime an army shows up, they get wiped out.
Yeah.
Or they fight each other till they're wiped out. Or they get confused in a fog and wander off. Or all these things happen. But Elijah's up to something else here. He says, strike them with blindness. So God struck them with blindness. Then Elijah said to them, this is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you're looking for. All right. So if they're going from Dothan back to Samaria, it's a pretty good ways, about 17 or 18 miles. So they're not, are they physically blind? Or has this blindness that he's asked for more of a consciousness?
Like a stupidity.
Yeah.
Dazed.
Yeah. Like
Like a daze.
Yeah.
yeah. And this is what I thought about when I was reading this. Like when Obi-Wan would walk into somewhere and they say, you don't want to find us here. And he says, oh, yeah, well, you're not here, or they're not here. That's the kind of thing that I think this was. That their minds were just under Elisha's control. And they trusted that. All right, so they're struck blind and they trust him. Okay? And he's leading them from a place of Dothan, which is not even a fortified city. And he's leading them to the capital city, a heavily fortified city. Okay? None of this. This is a crazy story.
Just think about Elijah, how the walk he had with the Lord to command such things.
Yeah. So and it's so seamless. You don't know if this is Elijah's plan or God's plan, but they're working together in it.
Well, I was
And-
going to say, it would have to be God's will in order for it to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so seamless.
At the same
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
Elijah is
Yeah.
still walking in his will.
Yeah. And I think the writer kind of purposely leaves us having to put that together that way. So he led them to Samaria. When they entered Samaria, Elijah said, Lord, open these men's eyes and let them see. So the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw that they were in the middle of Samaria. They're in the middle of the fortified city of the capital city. So when the king of Israel saw them, and this is a huge army, remember, lots of horses, lots of chariots. When he saw them, he said to Elijah, should I kill them? Should I kill them, my father? Now, most of the time he can't stand Elijah, but he's calling him my father, which is just a total surrender of his respect to Elijah. So Elijah replied, don't kill them. Do you kill those you have captured with your sword or your bow? Remember the history here. There's been other times when God has delivered enemies into Israel's hands. And what did Ahab do? This is Ahab's son that's doing this. He made a deal with the guy. He let him go. God wanted him dead, and Ahab delivered him and said, let's make an economic deal here. And God got really upset about it. Okay? Now, God has delivered the same foreign king into his hands, and there's a totally different outcome here. And what Elijah said, he says, you didn't kill him the last time. Why do you think you need to kill him this time? Although it's a huge army that's here. So this is what he does. Elijah said, don't kill them. Set food and water in front of them so they can eat and drink and then go to their master. So he prepared a big feast for them. When they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they went to their master. The Aramean raiders did not come into Israel's land again, except they do. We find out later in the next chapter they do. So what is God? What's the message that God is sending here? What part of God's character do we discover in this story that's been missing from the Israelite point of view. Okay?
Passion?
Well, one thing is compassion.
Yeah, empathy.
Yeah.
Giving, I mean, what did we say the other night? Was it Sunday night and then Wednesday night before about being in the middle of chaos, being what God
Yeah.
expects us to be, being the salt of light, but give and show Him, you know, turn the other cheek kind of thing. I
Yes,
guess.
so they start out, they're going to capture and probably kill God's man, God's prophet. And the prophet ends up setting a feast before them. Oh, y'all not getting this?
Okay, I'm slow.
No. That's what Jesus did. So we're finding the character of God in this in ways that is fully revealed when Jesus is here. Jesus' enemies come for him, ultimately do kill him. But in the process, he's laid out a feast for them. See? So here's a part of God's character that has been missing in all of this. Where we've seen it before when God said, I'm going to do this thing so that you will know that I'm the Lord your God. He did that twice with Ahab, one of the worst kings ever. He did it twice with Ahab so that they would know. But did they know? No, one time he makes a deal with this guy's daddy. And so Ahab never figured it out. But now, who's figuring it out? The nations. The pagan nation is being showed something that God had been showing only to his people. Okay? And so now we're fixing to see a little shift when we get to the siege of Samaria, because God lets some bad things happen to his people. Okay? In an effort for them to know what? That he's bad? That God's bad and he's vengeful and all of those things?
No, that he's good. And that he is.
There is a life that exists without God. And they're fixing to find that out for a very short period of time. Now, you've noticed, we've talked about this several times, how there'll be a little story, and then later on, that same theme or that same idea will blossom into this big, huge story. Well, this is what this next part of this is. It's a little story. It's quite painful to read in places. You can't imagine this happening. But it's a foreshadowing of things that are going to come. And the writer's helping prepare us for that. And the whole idea, as we read through this, we get the idea that there is a reality without God that we want to avoid. And we have the ability to do it. Elijah did not, everything about Elijah's life exemplifies this seamlessness with God. Okay? And everything that we're about to see that happens in the northern kingdom illustrates the divisiveness between God and his people. Not that God's divided himself, but they keep withdrawing themselves through the worship of other gods and just simply ignoring him. So we'll read on here with verse 24 of chapter 6. So it says, sometime later, we don't know how much time that is, but King Ben-Hadad's on the scene still. Brought all his military units together and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. So there's sometime later, the power of Aram has broadened. They've taken in other little satellite countries. So his army's bigger. His exercise of control and power has increased considerably. Okay, so he brings all this together and he lays siege to Samaria. So the thinking is they've tried to be friends. They can't be friends. So they've kind of developed this antagonistic relationship. And Ben-Hadad wants Israel. He wants to have power over it like he does everything else around it. So there was a severe famine. At the same time this was going on, there was a severe famine in Samaria. And they continued the siege against it until a donkey's head sold for 34 ounces of silver, and a cup of dove's dung sold for 2 ounces of silver. Now that sounds terrible, right? So a donkey's head, kill a donkey, cut the head off. Evidently, they were eating the donkeys,
Jeez.
and you sold the donkey's head to boil like you would for hog heads cheese, and just eating the meat off the donkey's head. They're hungry. They're starving. Same idea with the dove's dung. Okay, so what we're talking about here is, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So there was an Akkadian, which is a group of people who live north. This was a euphemism in their language that would describe the husk from the seed. So we know how they would thresh wheat. They beat the husk, and the wheat would fall. The wheat kernels would fall out, and what was left was the husk and the stalk. Well, he's saying people were buying the husk, and it came to be identified as dove's dung. Why would that be identified as that? Well, because birds, when they eat a seed, they very often pass the seed and the sheath around the seed separately. So as an example, there's never been a magnolia tree sprout without it having first been eaten by a bird. I bet you didn't know that.
Real.
Yeah, my dad's a
No
forester,
idea.
so I know that. That's why
No
you'll
idea.
often see cedars the same way. So you often see cedar trees and magnolia trees growing along fence rows, and it's because birds do their business. And so this is the same kind of thing. What was left behind, okay, stayed in the dung, and he's saying people were so hungry that they were possibly even digging through the bird's dung in order to get enough to eat. So the idea is to illustrate just how utterly starved they were for something to eat. And it gets worse. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, "My lord, the king, help." He probably has heard this all day long for weeks and weeks. He answered, "If the Lord doesn't help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor or the wine press?" Meaning, look, I can't feed you. There's nothing on the threshing floor. There's no wine in the wine press. If the Lord's not fixing this problem, nobody on heaven and earth is going to be able to fix the problem. Then the king asked her, "What's the matter?" She said, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son and we will eat him today. Then we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her the next day, 'Give up your son and we will eat him.' But she has hidden the son." So further to illustrate just how terrible it was in Samaria. So this huge army, nothing can move in or out, a famine, nothing can grow anywhere. And he's literally starving these people out so that he can conquer them.
Can I point something out?
Mm-hmm.
In Leviticus 26,
Verse 29.
it says, "You will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters." This is the third of his inflictions for not keeping your end of the covenant.
Right. That's right.
Okay, first he makes it all, it starts with the famine, and then it's controlled by the enemy, and then it's the enemy's sword, and then it gets so bad that you're eating your sons and daughters.
That's right.
And that's what it says God's going to do in Leviticus. So God is doing nothing but what he warned would happen if they continued in their pagan worship.
That's right.
So see, God he's the God of his word, whether it's good or bad. But as you go on through Leviticus, it says, if you come back to me, then you'll get this back.
That's right. His
If you
compassion
continue
is.
to obey me,
Yeah.
you will get this back. So I believe it's a matter of, and this is a human thing in all ways, if you don't get consequences for your actions, then you continue to do bad actions. Okay, and when you start doing good actions, your life changes and you have good things in your life. So
Yeah.
if you were living a life of sin, a criminal, offensive to your family, hurting, doing bad things, and you believe that you're not doing anything wrong, unless you face the consequences of your actions, you will not understand that you are in the wrong.
Well,
And our godly Father is showing this.
I think there are instances though where, in fact, earlier in this, where God gave them the opportunity to recognize that He was their Lord and God. And had they recognized it, they may have not had to suffer the consequences.
But they didn't.
But they didn't. And so the consequences aren't a necessity until we refuse to see God in them at work.
Now, I can remember in 2015 when we were doing, me and John were doing prison ministry over here at the workforce for
Work release?
Parish, work release. When they went ahead and moved over there by the dump. Okay, and then they started doing this thing with the police officers where they would come in and they would have a speaker and all that. I think we went to one over at the church here in Walker, you and I, one year, probably before the flood in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
We went to one there because they decided to expand on it, and the priest, who's like a 90-year-old man, I cannot remember his name, that was the speaker for that first meeting that the police did this, and they wanted to make it a monthly thing. I think it was a monthly breakfast or something.
Well, we still do that. Well,
But
we did to COVID.
that was the one thing that he spoke on, was consequences for your actions.
Mm-hmm.
If you do bad things, you face consequences. If you do good things, you collect rewards.
Mm-hmm.
He says if you go out drinking and you decide to drive, this was an example that he gave, then you're going to be put in jail. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars. Your reputation's going to be shot. But if you go ahead and you have somebody else take the keys and bring you home, then you are setting a good example, and none of these things happen to you. Okay, your reward is not facing the consequences.
Right.
You know, and that so impressed me as a biblical thing that it brought me to this verse a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it stuck with me the whole time. But it is the way that God helps us grow. You know,
Through his discipline.
you know, like I have a child that does not understand consequences, so now he has to face consequences. Okay, and if it straightens him out, he will get the reward of not facing consequences anymore. Can't come out thinking that, well, I've done the right thing now. Now I need to be showered with gold. Okay, everything needs to be wonderful in my life. The reward is simply not having to face those consequences.
Right.
And you may get more, but it's not a guarantee.
Is this the first time in the Bible where cannibalism was talked about?
Yes, but it won't be the last time.
Okay.
And I am sorry. You know,
That's all right.
for that.
That's horrible.
All right, so when the king heard the woman's words, he tore his clothes. So we've heard that said before, you know, when you're in anguish, you tear your clothes. Well, it turns out, then as he was passing by on the wall, the people saw that there was sackcloth under his clothes next to his skin. So he's been walking around in mourning all this time. And the idea behind that is, when you are in mourning, when you're in sackcloth and ashes, you are utterly useless. Your heart, your mind, your soul, everything is turned inward to your own pain. And that's what he was in. Even if he'd have had a solution, he would never have been able to exercise it. He was looking to himself to be the answer, right? What can I do? What can I do? And even David, in the midst of his pain, wore sackcloth and ashes for how long? Short little while, 7 days. And then he got up, he took a bath, he combed his hair, he got all dressed up, and he went on and did his kingly duties. So there's a contrast here about what's going on. So he announced this: may God punish me and do it so severely if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. So his solution is to go after God's man. All right? So he hasn't really thought through this very well, right? This is the same Elijah that God has revealed the heavenly host to. The same Elijah that is so seamlessly in tune with God that God tells Elijah what his enemies are doing all the time. And he's uttered these words: I think I'm just going to go cut his head off. At least I'll have some satisfaction
He's blaming him.
about something. Yeah, he's blaming Elijah. Craziness. All right. So Elijah was sitting in his house. The king's pacing around and Elijah's sitting. The contrasting picture is one that's under intense pressure and anxiety, and the other that is quite calm and at peace.
Total peace.
Yeah. He was sitting around with the elders of the people. The leaders of the people were sitting with him. The king sent a man ahead of him, but before the messenger got to Elijah, before he got to him, Elijah said to the elders, do you see this murderer has sent someone to remove my head? How does he know that? Because God's already told him. Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door to keep him out. Isn't the sound of his master's feet behind him? So Elijah knows everything that the king is up to. While Elijah was still speaking with him, the messenger came down to him. Then he said, this disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Now there's a big discussion in commentaries about who's saying this last line in chapter 6, because the structure of it doesn't say, well, is it the messenger, or is it Elijah? Is it the king speaking from off stage somewhere? It's very, huh?
The NIV says king.
Yeah, and a lot of them will say that it's Elijah, and a lot of them will say it's the messenger. So what's the sentence mean regardless of who says it? Well, I would think it's not Elijah, because Elijah doesn't have to ask the question about where this has come from. So the king through the messenger maybe, or the messenger, but the question is asked. The statement is made, all of this is God's fault. It started out Elijah's fault. Now it's God's fault. And why do I need to wait for God to fix this any longer? Okay.
My Bible
So
says that. It says the king correctly saw the calamity is from the Lord.
yeah. Yeah, so yours says it's the king speaking. Yeah. So it's obvious that that's the king's sentiment, if it's not the proper pronoun form
Right.
that precedes all of this in the Hebrew. But the idea is, first it was Elijah's fault and Elijah didn't fix it. It's God's fault now, and I'm not waiting anymore for God to fix it. So what are you going to do? That's really the next question. Okay, king, what are you going to do? If you're not going to wait on God to fix it, then what are you going to do?
He didn't wait on God to do it. He took it.
Yeah, so here we go. So Elijah replied. Elijah knows what's about to happen. He knows what God's fixing to do. So he says, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow at Samaria's gate, 6 quarts of fine flour will sell for a half an ounce of silver. So remember, the donkey's head was selling for 32 ounces of silver. Now 6 quarts of flour is going to sell for a little bit of nothing. And 12 quarts of barley will sell for a half an ounce of silver. Then the captain, the king's right-hand man, responded to the man of God, look, even if the Lord were to make the windows in heaven, could this really happen? So what he's saying is, even if the Lord opened up the skies and water fell, there's not enough time for a crop to be raised to feed people so that they won't starve. There's no way. By tomorrow? No way. Elisha announced, you will in fact see it with your own eyes, but you won't eat any of it. Now, 4 men with skin disease or leprosy were at the entrance to the city gate. They said to each other, why just sit here until we die? If we say, let's go into the city, we will die there because the famine is in the city. But if we sit here, we will also die. So now, come on, let's go surrender to the Aramean camp. If they let us live, we'll live. But if they kill us, we will die like we're going to die anyway. So at least they've come up on one good solution. They might have mercy on us and let us live if we go to our enemy. So the diseased men got up at twilight to go to the Arameans, to the Aramean camp. When they came to the camp's edge, they discovered that no one was there. Now listen, this is why. For the Lord had caused the Aramean camp to hear the sounds of chariots, horses, and a large army. So here we are. The very same thing that had rescued Elisha before was now at work, really decimating the army or causing it to turn tail and run. Okay? And this is what they think. The Arameans had said to each other, the king of Israel must have hired the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to attack us. So they had gotten up and fled at twilight, abandoning their tents, horses, and donkeys. The camp was intact, and they had fled for their lives. So at the very same time that the lepers decide they're going to go into the camp, God scares this army into just turning tail and run. Okay? When these diseased men came to the edge of the camp, they went into a tent to eat and drink. All right, see, here's the irony of all of this. Okay? God's at work, and the only people that know it is a bunch of lepers. And the only reason they know it is because they were smart enough to figure out, if we're going to die here, or if we're going to die there, it really doesn't matter. Maybe we'll have a chance to live there. So how are they able to live? It's not because any of the Aramean. It's because God had already, it's as if God had run off the whole army so these 4 lepers could feast. Chew on that for a minute.
The whole lot.
Yeah. When these diseased men came, they went to a tent to eat. Then they picked up the silver, gold, and clothing and went off and hid them. Then came back and entered another tent, picked up things up, and hid them. So they're little thieves, too. Nobody's around. They're going to get rich. Then they said to each other, we're not doing what's right. Today is a day of good news. Okay? God has vanquished the enemy and provided his people with plenty. The word for good news in the Greek is what? It's evangelion, which is translated to us as the gospel. So it wasn't lost on these writers and the writers that translated the Hebrew into the Greek. They would have used the word evangelion. This is good news. God has conquered our enemies, and he's providing for us in ways that we don't understand and don't even deserve. It says, if we are silent and wait until morning light, our punishment will catch up with us. So let's go tell the king's household. So they say, if we are silent with this great thing, it's going to come bite us on the butt. It won't be so great if we keep quiet about it. The diseased men came and called to the city's gatekeepers and told them, we went to the Aramean camp and no one was there, no human sounds, not a peep around. There was nothing but tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents were intact. So the gatekeepers called out, and the news was reported to the king's household. So the king got up in the night and said to his servants, let me tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the open country, thinking when they come out of the city, we will take them alive and go into the city.
It's a trap.
So it's a trap. And this was not an
Yeah,
uncommon
fear.
military tactic at the time. This was done a lot, where they would abandon their camp and go hide in the hills and lead everybody. It's like a Trojan horse. Yeah, lead everybody to believe that there's nothing there, and then all at once the army would attack. So he had reason to think this. But one of the servants responded, "Please let messengers take 5 of the horses that are left in the city," meaning they had ate the rest. "Their fate is like the entire Israelite community who will die, so let's send them and see." The messengers took 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army, saying, "Go and see," or follow their tracks and see where they are, is what he's doing. Track them down and see. So they followed them as far as the Jordan. They saw that the whole way was littered with clothes and equipment the Arameans had thrown off in their haste. The messengers returned and told the king. So exactly what the lepers had told them is true. Then the people went out and plundered the Aramean camp. It was then that 6 quarts of fine flour sold for a half ounce. So remember, this is tomorrow, just like Elisha said. They started out at twilight. They got to the camp. They came back around dusk. The king sent them out in the middle of the night. They've returned that morning saying, yeah, everything's true. And now they're raiding the camp. It says, it was then that the 6 quarts of fine flour sold for a half ounce of silver, and 12 quarts of barley sold for a half ounces of silver, according to the word of the Lord. Now, that's exactly what Elijah said the Lord would happen. The king had appointed the captain, his right-hand man, to be in charge of the city gate, but the people trampled him in the gate. He died just as the man of God had predicted when the king had come to him. When the man of God had said to the king, "About this time tomorrow, 12 quarts of barley will sell for a half ounce of silver, and 6 quarts of fine flour will sell for a half ounce of silver at Samaria's gate," this captain had answered the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord were to make windows in heaven, could this really happen?" And Elijah had said, "You will in fact see it with your own eyes, but you won't eat any of it." This is what happened to him. The people trampled him in the city gate and died.
I was wondering about that. I was waiting until you stopped, but I was like, why did he tell the officer that they were going to give him the flour and give him the barley, but why did he tell the guy, you can see it with your own eyes, but you won't be able to eat any of it? That's been bothering me all this time, but now I know.
Yeah. And the rest of the story is this. So the writer repeats word for
'Cause he's
word
dead.
again, right? Elijah said it, and then he repeats it, the same thing, word for word. Okay, it's like the most important thing we learn about about the story. 2 things. One is that there's good news. Okay, God worked on behalf of His people. Okay. And they received a bounty they did not deserve. They didn't have to work for it. They didn't have to do anything. God provided it in the same way that He told Ahab, "You will see today that I'm the Lord your God." And they went up on a hill and they watched these 3 armies butcher each other because God threw them in a state of confusion. But Ahab missed the message. He missed the whole point God was trying to make with him. Okay? And here we have an illustration of, in microcosm, what the nation is about. The captain missed the message. Okay, why? How do we know that? Because this is what he said to Elisha. This can't happen. If God were to open windows in heaven, this can't happen. So what's he saying? God has no power to do anything.
No, zero faith. That also, with the lepers, okay, it's about sharing the gospel. Are we going to be punished for not sharing the gospel, or are we going to go ahead and share the gospel?
They knew very well that what they were withholding from their people.
The good news.
Yeah. Then you can go.
So where are we in this story?
Well, where are we?
We're here holding the good news.
That's exactly right.
Okay, and if we're not sharing the good news, then the consequences, as we talked about consequences earlier, may await us as well.
That's just right. That's the story. That's the New Testament story that we find here.
Yeah.
And the reason why the reason why this story is repeated is because not only in his saying that God can't do it, it's saying that we've already called on God. My king's called on him, and now he's blaming God. Why in the world would God do anything to correct the situation? The king says it's his fault. And Elijah is saying that you're going to see that God can do whatever he decides to do in ways that you can't even imagine. And you're going to see it, but you're not going to benefit from it. Okay? Because God has a message to send here. And you're going to be the messenger by losing your life. And so it's repeated again, see? So that we make sure we get the message.
You see, though, when he said, will God open the windows of heaven, there's no way to grow that overnight.
Right.
He was only thinking in terms of it being grown. He had no thought that it could come from some other way or some other.
And so if an Aramean had come wandering into Samaria and said, where's that army that was after us? We heard an army, 500,000 big, they were coming after us. We thought it was the Hittites and the Egyptians. No. Nobody knows except us.
Right.
Nobody knows about the chariots and the thundering horses in this story. Nobody's privy to that except the reader. God holds that little bit of information for us to understand that he is at work even when people that are utterly rebellious against him need his help. He's at work. And he restores them. It is amazing. Because when we follow this behavior all the way through, and we begin to see that there's a point at which God is able to look back and say, I showed you my compassionate love time and time again, and you refused to see it. And now we're at a place where now you must experience what it means to play the harlot with a God that loves you so much, is what he's saying. So we get into these other kings where they wound out in exile and they're carried away. The thing that they're without when all of this is over is two very important things to them. One is they've been removed from the geography that God had given Abraham. They believed that everything about the promise of God rested in that little piece of land that he had given them. And they were removed from that. So that's one hand of God gone, okay? And then the other is they moved into an area where for the first time, really, they were almost required to intermarry with other races to survive. So the genealogy is the other thing that was diminished. And so in both places, they felt as though their connection with God had been torn away. And for 75 years, they lived that way.
The two most important things to their culture,
Yeah.
the geography and the
Yeah.
genealogy.
And how does God ultimately restore those things? He restores it in the one that he made the promise to through it. Abraham's seed, Paul reminds us, is who God made the promise to. So the inheritance and the genealogy belongs to Christ. And all people are brought under him, Jew and Gentile alike. So we're not left wondering anymore how God brings correction to all of this that's messed up as we move through this. Because the rest of the story is in Christ.
There's so much there. I had a thought, and I know most of you know who he is, but I listen to him quite often on my way to work in the morning, David Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm.
You are like him, man.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you are, man.
No.
You get into the deep stuff.
Well, I read one book. Robert Alter wrote a book, and he's not a theologian by any means. He's studied Hebrew literature all his life, and I really learned a lot about how to tie these things together in a way that have opened up so many things for me that I never saw before.
But see, like me, I wouldn't, the genealogy didn't even cross me.
Yeah. Well, and there's a commentary, and I can't remember, I think it's Stephen Smalley's commentary, but he does a wonderful job of tying all that together, and how the worst punishment in the world was to be removed from the land because God's peace was upon the land. It says that several times. There was rest on every side, there was peace on every side, and the scriptures describe that as the land. And so when they were removed from the land, they literally believed that God's peace would never be theirs again. And we want peace. There's a thing deep within all of us that are desiring to be at peace. So today, to have peace, a lot of people are convinced you got to have a $200,000 vacation home somewhere and be able to get away, and that's peace. We really are looking for it. We lay our heads down at night and we want things to be quiet. We don't want the phone to ring, and we want peace. We want our families to be orderly, and we want the world to be right. And the turmoil that we're in right now, we keep searching for ways in which God's peace can come upon this, and we become frustrated when those that seem to be leading us are not looking there for it. They're looking for everything else that somehow or another is supposed to accomplish this. And so we begin to feel anxious like they were, because how does God come to us if for them, they couldn't even go worship him anymore. There was no place to worship. And for us, we have that same kind of anxiety about it, because we feel like as a nation, we've just kind of lost our way to him. And we don't know how to get that back. That's being in exile. That's like knowing where you got to go, but you can't get there because of whatever reason. So
it's confusion, it's chaos. The absence of chaos would be the serenity and the peace.
So Jesus,
as long as we're living in that chaos, then
but there was nothing more chaotic in all of history than first century Palestine with Roman rule. And Jesus comes and he says, you can't have peace. You just can't worry. Don't worry, you won't have peace. If you worry, you won't have peace. If you don't worry, you'll have peace. And he explains to us how to do that. And it's a total enmeshment with him, with the Father, through him. Much like Elijah had. Okay? And Elijah, they're pacing the floor because they're all starving, and Elijah's sitting in his house talking with the leaders.
He's at total peace.
He's at peace. Because he knows what God is doing in this. So our job today, if you want to carry that into today, is to get busy and to know what God's business is in it, and then serve him in it, so that we're able to participate in what he's doing, like
Peace.
Elisha.
Living in a van down by the river.
Elijah wasn't starving.
No, never mentions Elijah starving, and we know that Elijah he knew where to go to get what he needed, right?
Yeah,
He'd done it
because
twice.
God was
Elijah had
faithful.
done it. Elisha had done
When you depend on him,
it. Yeah.
He'll never be.
That's right. He was right in the middle of the family, and he was doing